Anzac Day, I'd like to connect a few dots from our Anzacs in World War I through to all the way back to the time of Abraham. I'm just going to move a few things off here. So as most of you know, we have our ladies' book club that we enjoy going through a book by Anne Hamilton, and it's called As Resplendent as Rubies. And sometime last year, some of us actually went through one of the chapters, and we were absolutely astounded by the information that was in it, and we absolutely enjoyed it. And at the time, I thought, oh, I would so love to share this for Anzac Day. And I was sharing that, told Max, and he said, right, you're on, do it. So, so we're doing it. So this is an excerpt from the relevant chapter, and I would just like to say that I'm not going to talk about everything that's in that chapter. It's actually a lot about naming and the names of God. So I will talk a little bit about that to what's relevant, but I encourage you to read the book if you are interested and join our club, because doing it together, we actually gain so much out of it, more than you would ever do by reading it yourself. So, 31st of October, 1917. This is what Anne's book says, and I'm going to read the paragraph that's relevant to this, and then we'll talk about all the relevant Bible verses, etc. So, 31st of October, 1917. A flame-red sun was setting in a haze of shimmering heat and luminous dust. The shutters of night were falling, and in the distance, a shielding darkness began to settle over the besieged town. The day was almost spent, the last chance to storm the defensive stronghold all but gone. Twice already that day, the horsemen stationed outside the town had been repelled. The German and Turkish troops within the redoubt had fought off their attack, forcing them to retreat into the desert. And a redoubt is like a temporary fort, so it could have been like the trenches. But on this dry, stony plain of the desert, there was no shelter and no water. And without those precious commodities, there were effectively no options. And so, with only the last fire-flecked glow of the setting sun on the tall minaret to guide them, 800 mounted infantrymen galloped towards Beersheba and its life-sustaining wells, horses panting, rifle shots whistling over their heads, machine guns rattling ahead of them, thousands of hooves pounding beneath them. The Anzac Light Horse Brigade charged the Turkish trenches. The Turkish defenders, believing the horsemen would dismount and do a hand-to-hand engagement, miscalculated the firing range. But the horses, frenzied with thirst, were determined, so their riders later said, to let nothing stand between them and the water that they craved. So they leapt the trenches, carrying the Anzacs straight into the fray. The taking of Beersheba by Allied mounted infantry was lightning sudden. It was so swift, the fleeing Turkish army was only able to sabotage a few of its ancient wells. So obviously the water is an essential part of life for everyone every day, and for the army and the horses, they all needed water in that time, absolutely critical for their horses. But most of the wells remained intact because they didn't get to sabotage all of them before they fled. The battle cleared the way for the assault on Jerusalem and was to be acclaimed as a significant turning point in the history of nations. So this account is not the first time the wells of Beersheba have been so pivotal. And I'll just go to the next one. So the Hebrew meanings, the Hebrew word beer describes both a well and a pit. And Beersheba means well of seven, or well of the earth. And we'll look at Genesis to understand that more. So Genesis 21, verses 22 to 34, we see here in the story of Abraham about 4,000 years ago at the well of the earth, which is Beersheba. Abraham covenanted with the ruler of the kingdom of Gerar named Abimelech. So we read in Genesis 21, verses 22 to 34, and I'll read that. At the time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my prosperity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who's done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard it until now. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both men swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting Lord. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. So although God had promised Abraham and his wife, Sarah, a son, and we know that Abraham and Sarah were both of an old age, it is clear that Sarah had quickly come to the conclusion that she wasn't actually able to do this. She wasn't a viable part of this equation, and she was barren. So for her husband to have an heir born of his own body, she would have to help God to keep his word by devising plan B. So therefore, she gave her servant Hagar to her husband as his second wife, hoping Hagar would get pregnant and produce a son which could be technically attributed to Sarah. Now Hagar was a foreigner. She was from Egypt, and in her native land, her name connected with the ruins of a temple to the goddess of Isis. Isis was an Egyptian goddess of marriage, fertility, motherhood, magic, and medicine. But through Hagar's residence in Abraham and Sarah's house, she comes to know the living God, our God. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how that worked because, we'll talk about it further, but, Sarah's plans and how she executes them. And I'm just loving how God is such a faithful God that he uses people, or he lets you be blind to people's faults and still see him through something. So I'm just flagging that. I'll talk about it in a minute. So, and living with Sarah and Abraham, she was a slave. So this is what I mean. And an abused woman. She was apparently nothing, more than a commodity in the eyes of her mistress, since Sarah never named her. She never refers to Hagar by name. She only as that slave woman or my handmaiden. She's never called Hagar. So Now Hagar was soon expecting Abraham's child, and as a consequence, she began to look down on Sarah. She might have had nothing in terms of wealth or freedom, but she did have the one and only thing Sarah so passionately wanted: fertility. In reaction, Sarah treated her even more harshly, the abuse intensifying to such a degree that Hagar fled into the wilderness to escape it. And there, by the spring of water in the desert, the angel of the Lord found her. The angel's first word, significantly, is her name, the name that Sarah never used. Just to clarify, when I read this next passage of Genesis, Sarah and Abraham were known as Sarai and Abram before they received their new names given to them by God. So when I'm referring to this next chapter, the next verse, they will be Sarai and Abram, but they are one and the same eventually. Okay, so right, so let's go to, so Genesis 1:16 says, so I've put on the PowerPoint the relevant verses, which I'll get to in a minute, but I want to read from one because it's very important to have context when we read. Sometimes a verse on its own doesn't actually tell the story. So now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt upon her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave you my servant to your embrace. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked at me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. And so here we see in verse 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered by multitude." In other words, just so many. And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So, verse 13, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." Therefore, the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. And I'm just going to go through over here. I don't know if you can see very well, but so you'll see this, there's a little dotted line that goes all the way up. That's the way of Shur, and that takes you to Beersheba. And at the very bottom of the screen, a little bit further down from Beersheba, almost at the end of the screen, you'll see a question mark. It says Bir Lahai Roy with a question mark. And that's the very possibly the well and the region of where that is. So that Bir Lahai Roy is the well at Beersheba. So Bir Lahai Roy, the meaning, the well of the living one who sees me. So she recognized that he saw her because he called her by name. And that's the name that Sarah had never used. So she felt like she'd never been seen, but he saw her. So with the way that she felt, is it any wonder that she called God the living one who sees me? So she could see his character. She could see that, recognize that in him. He sees me. The Lord sees me. So she'd had a deeply personal encounter with God. You can imagine, as a slave, as an abused person, she was probably hardly ever seen. She probably didn't even, she probably didn't care much about herself. It was probably very tough for her. And yet, as I say, I'm just interested to see that in a household where she lived, that she probably wasn't valued. She was just a commodity, as they said. Yet, through all of that, even she had a different religion. She worshipped another goddess, but yet she lived in the household of Abraham and Sarah, and she actually saw God. Now, she probably didn't see God very easily through Sarah and the way that she behaved, but she still saw God. And that's what's amazing to me. I sort of think, wow, he was with her all the way, and through all of that, she could see him. She cried out to him. She had to go and find him, but she knew that he was there. And so I love that. I just think, humans can do all sorts of terrible things, but God is sovereign, and God shines through everything. So I'm enjoying thinking about that. So what happens between Hagar and the angel of the Lord at the well on the road to Shur is prophetic of Jesus encountering the woman of Samaria at the well on the road to Sychar. We have previously talked about this, so I won't talk about it now, but another example of this incredible living word that we have in the Bible. So this Beersheba and this whole region, it all keeps coming back to everything that's written in the Bible is just this never-ending living word for us. And wherever we look, it just comes back to us, wherever we are. And even now, as I say, back to the Anzacs, we're getting back to something else. So in the meantime, Sarah fell pregnant with her own child. And we read in Genesis 21, verses 1 to 7, the birth of Isaac. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at a time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who will have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a child? Yet I have borne him a son and in his old age. And so the connection of this, the reason that I wanted to bring Isaac in is because the connection of this is that later Isaac was actually mentioned in 2 other times as the place, Beer Lahai Roi is where Isaac was living. In Genesis 24:62, it says, "Now Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev." And Genesis 25:11 says, "After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi." So it's a very significant place all the way through history. Now I want to go back to Hagar. In Genesis 21, verses 8 to 21, through all that happened in the household, and all that Hagar went through, and then Sarah eventually has her own child and everything. But God never forgets. God told Sarah that he would God told Hagar that he would look after her and her family. And so I just want to read Genesis 21:8-21. God protects Hagar and Ishmael. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing, probably like jeering at him. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "But be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall be named your offspring." And of course, we know that we've got that promise. "And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread. I hope I've got my pages right. Took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." She didn't want to be too close when her baby died. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar?" So again, Hagar, I'm talking to you, Hagar. "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast in your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened, so again, all hope is lost. They've got no more water. They're in the wilderness, absolutely alone. But here is God. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. God never forgot his promise to Hagar. And I love how Anne puts this in her book. She says, God calls us by name and asks us to look up so that we can see him, so that we can see our own worth in his eyes. I just want to repeat that so we're called to look up so that we can see our own worth in his eyes. I just think that's beautifully put. And who else can tell us our identity other than him? So he calls us to renew our faith and our vision of who God is. When betrayal has blinded us, as he did many years later for Hagar, he calls us to help and draw from others as from a spring of water. So again, this togetherness is just so important. Life and truth, love and joy, calling to do it together. And in that delight, when we see and we are seen, he calls us to gift others with the same. So again, I want to emphasize that. He calls us to gift others with the same. The same is to see others and for us to be seen. When we see others and we are seen. He asks us to give sight to the spiritually blind, first by seeing them and acknowledging them, being present heart to heart with them, using their names. But to begin with, we need to see ourselves as we truly are. So look up. So Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it is the wellspring of life." And here, the Hebrew word for wellspring also means boundary or border. And, God gives us boundaries and asks us to put them in place so that we can receive the consummation of our heart's desire, but not be consumed by it. So Max spoke last week about, how good things can sometimes be what people love. And they're not necessarily bad things, but that can be stuff that we love more than God. And so we need to guard our hearts against this too. That's something to do too. So I like that verse. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of this is the wellspring of life. So all life comes from within, from who God is within us. So back to the Anzacs now. I'm going to finish with the Anzac story. Anne writes, on the 31st of October, 1917, 800 horsemen from Australia thundered across the dusty plains towards the place where Hagar had lived with Abraham and Sarah so many millennia previously. History has made that day as Beersheba was liberated and the first wedge was driven into centuries of Ottoman domination of the Holy Land. They were supported in the Battle of the Holy Land, and I love this too. Listen to all of these. They were supported. So these Australian, well, they were really Anzacs, but I'm going to call them Australian because that's what she's written. They were supported in the Battle of the Holy Land by British Yemenite and New Zealand troopers, Pacific Islanders who sailed up the coast, keeping valuable supply lines open, by Sikh, Nepalese and Indian battalions, and by Arab irregulars under the command of T.E. Lawrence, and T.E. Lawrence is otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia. And so I just love that picture. He's just brought in all those nations, everybody together. So did those foreign troopers, ordinary sun-bronzed men who cursed the heat and the dust, know they were riding into a watershed moment in time? Almost certainly not. And, the consequences of them coming along and just being there at the time, and that particular battle, which led to, so much more. The first wedge driven into the domination of centuries of domination of the Ottomans, getting rid of them out of the Holy Land. So I'm thinking of those soldiers, and I'm thinking, well, they're probably just, ordinary Aussie guys sitting around, and all of a sudden then there's a war and they've got to jump in and go and help. And none of them would have ever thought about anything else. It was just day-to-day life. And then they were conscripted and they'd have to go and do it. But did they know the consequences of just standing and doing what they were asked to do? So, and then history was made a day a foreign slave fled from the domination of Sarah and met the angel of the Lord. So again, did she know? She blazed a trail for others to follow. But did Hagar know she was heading straight into a watershed moment at that time? Again, almost certainly not. She just ran away. She was desperate and, So we simply meet him by faith and ask him to take us to the wellspring of our hearts. And there we look up so we can see and be seen, so we can name and be named. Because remember that Hagar named, she saw what God was. She saw his character that day, or an aspect of it that made her be able to name him. So God calls us in this time to be history makers too. And we're not going to recognize the watershed moments until long after. If at all, we might never know. So what is he calling us to be? Well, a few thoughts to help us on our way. Max said, Jesus didn't come to be served, but he came to serve. So if we're able to be like him, then that's to be our heart position. And we are to work together in Psalm 133. He calls us to work with other believers and commands a blessing when we do. So this is beautiful. So I've put the whole verse, but the particular ones are 1 and 4. But look at that. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the collar of his robes. It's like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountain of Zion. I think I fixed it. Yes? Okay. And from there, the Lord has commanded the blessing of life everlasting. That's the blessing that we have. Work together, and we have that from there, life everlasting. So what do I see in this? I don't see that it's just about a location. It's not just a geographical location. And it's also not just, a random thing that happened. And I guess what I see is that we don't have to be specifically courageous or talented or famous or anything else to be able to be a history maker. As I said, Anzac's probably just everyday guys getting on with their lives, and then all of a sudden they're actually in a place where they actually make history. And as I say, I love too how so many nations work together in that. And I look at the fragmented world at the moment that we live in with so much anxiety and angst about different nations and how nobody can seem to work together, and that it's just this, everybody's this big blame game of who's allowed to be where in the world. And I guess none of us have the solutions, and it's fraught with problems for everyone. But God has put us, He's blessed each of us where we are. And some people are in such unfortunate positions, and we can look at ourselves as very fortunate in the world. We're probably in the top 10% of where we live and how we live. And I look at that and I think, well, Lord, I don't have the answers, but you do. And the only thing we can do is look at people just like Hagar. Like Hagar saw God, he looked at her and he saw her, and he didn't just see her as a person walking by. He saw her, he looked at her, and she felt that look. And so for me, the people in my path, no matter who they are or what religion they are or anything else. It's something for me to think about and to work towards and to acknowledge everybody and to look at people. So look at them, that they matter, and no matter who they are and no matter what they believe. So whoever God puts in my path each day, that's what I'll be doing, because in his history, and the way that he lives and the way that he shows others how to live, it's all about taking care of everyone, no matter who they are. So I just love that story. I think it was just so beautiful how, God just highlights so many things. And, again, I was thinking about the times that we live in and the difficulty that some people have. And, some people, for example, if somebody from a different religion is saved and becomes a Christian, then people are interested to hear their walk and their lives and everything else. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's great. So we heard all of that, and now you're a Christian, and so now you're one of us, and that's great. But what about when they weren't one? And, I sort of think that, because I think that how do we look upon people before they've changed? Because people might never change, and I can look at myself and I can think that, for 40 years of my life, nearly 40, I didn't really know God. I knew him. I'd been to Sunday school and I heard about him and everything, but I hadn't committed my life to him. And so what's different for me eventually then, of course, I was chosen and come along, here I am. But what's different for me, because I didn't have any kind of particular other religion, other belief, other than thinking that I was able to do it all myself and didn't have to think about God. So what's different when I look at somebody who has a different belief, like Hagar? She had a completely different belief, and but God still chose her, and so what I'm looking at is we don't have to worry about what people's journeys are on or where they are or anything else. It's because God might choose them, and he might not, but he might. And so how is our attitude to all the people that we come across, and even those that we don't, because there's so much generalization going on that, to me, I think people sort of get shoved into a section of society, and people decide what they are before they even know who they are. And so I think that it's time for us to think about that, and to think about each person. As God looked at Hagar, he looked at her as a person, somebody that had never been seen. She was a slave girl, so she was in one of those things. She was a commodity. She was just a slave girl, so she was one in those little channels. But all of a sudden, she realized, oh no, but I'm not, because somebody looks at me. So I want to be thinking about how I can look at people, how I can make them feel that, yep, you matter, no matter who you are. So we work together on this, which is very beautiful. And I think that's my last slide. Yep, we dwell in unity. And we have faith in him who called us. So I just want to pray. Lord, thank you for using your living word to encourage us and to show us the way when we feel lost or when we feel we want to control an outcome. Lord, we look to you for guidance in faith. And thank you for bringing us to this place in you, Lord. And thank you just for being you, Lord, for showing us so many things and, writing yourself in our hearts, Lord. Just being able to be us the way that you created us to be, Lord, to live within your boundaries, Lord, to choose to follow you, Lord. And we do know that that is a sacrifice, because it's a choice that we make, Father. It's a choice that we make not to just do the things that are comfortable for us, but actually do the things that we know are right and that are within the boundaries that you've set. And we thank you, Lord. Thank you for that, because it's a beautiful, secure place. Thank you, Father. Amen.